began a good work in you. He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. He'll be faithful to complete it. He who started the work will be faithful to complete it in you.
Oh, thank you, Lord, that you're faithful to us.
He who began a good work in you.
He who began a good work in you.
He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. He'll be faithful to complete it. He who started the work will be faithful to complete it in you.
The struggle you're facing is slowly replacing your hope with despair. Or the process is long and you're losing your song in the night.
You can be sure that the Lord has his hand on you, safe and secure. He will never abandon you. You are his treasure, and he finds his pleasure in you.
He who began.
He who began a good work in you.
Began a good work in you.
He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. Will be faithful. He'll be faithful to complete it. He who started the work will be faithful to complete it in you.
He'll be faithful.
Will be faithful to complete it. He'll be faithful to complete it. He who started the work will be faithful to complete it in you. He'll complete it in you.
Lord, we praise you tonight for your faithfulness. Your words declared it. You will be
All right. Hey, Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everybody. It is Friday morning, September the 8th, 2023, and we're going to continue through Philippians chapter 3. I was thinking about this morning, I thought, I could go verses 15 to 21, and there's just no way I could finish. I thought it'd be nice to finish the chapter today. It's a Friday, and I'd finish the chapter today. Remember that next week we're going to be doing Daily Manna replays because I'm going to be traveling to Missouri, and so next week we're going to be doing replays, but then we'll be back up in Philippians on the following Monday, which will be Monday, September the 18th, so 10 days from today. The title of today's manna is the Halakhah of Yeshua. The Halakhah of Yeshua, and then we'll talk about Halakhah in a little bit, but it means the way of walking. Halach in Hebrew is to walk, and the Halakhah is the way of walking. How do you live out your life? How do we live and move and have our being, kind of thing. And so the Halakhah of Yeshua is today's manna. Philippians 3, beginning in verse 1. Finally, my brothers and sisters, rejoice in the Lord. To keep writing these same things to you is not troublesome for me, but for you it's a safeguard. Beware of the dogs, beware of the evil workers, beware of the mutilation. For it is we who are the circumcision, who worship by the Spirit of God, who worship by the Spirit, Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God, and glory in Messiah Yeshua, and have not depended on the flesh. Right. So again, we who are the circumcision, Paul says, are those who are characterized by a people who live their lives in pattern, who worship by the Spirit of God, having to do with the pattern of life, who find their confidence, their glory, their boast in Messiah Yeshua, not in the things of the flesh, not in their religious, like, oh, well, we've checked off these boxes, so that gives us a place of hierarchy. Paul says that's those who are the people of God don't depend on the flesh, because if it were for that, he said, although I myself might have confidence in the flesh also. If anyone else thinks he might depend on the flesh, I far more. Circumcised the 8th day, of the nation of Israel, from the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the Torah, a Pharisee. As for zeal, persecuting Messiah's community. As for Torah righteousness, found blameless. But whatever things were gained to me, these I have considered as loss for the sake of the Messiah. More than that, I consider all things to be loss in comparison to the surpassing value of knowing or knowledge of Messiah Yeshua, my Lord. Because of him, I have suffered, or I have lost, I have forfeited all things, he says. I've suffered the loss or forfeited all things, and that's okay, he says. I consider them garbage. I consider them, the word is skubala. I consider them refuse or dung. So you say he suffered the loss of all things. It'd be like this. Like every time I pull my garbage cans out to the street, I'm not like, well, this is hard, but I'm suffering the loss of all this trash. I'm gonna miss you, trash. No, you go, this is the cleanliness I get in exchange is much better. So he says, I've forfeited all of it, and I think of it, I regard it as garbage, as useless, as a pile of poo, basically, in order that I might gain Messiah and be found in him, not having my righteousness derived from the law, from Torah, but one that is through trusting in Messiah, the righteousness that is based on trust, of the knowing, verse 10, my aim, he says, of the knowing of the power of his, of knowing him. My aim is to know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship, or the sharing, the partaking in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, if somehow I might arrive at the resurrection from among the dead. I want to know him. I want to know him fully, right? That's my aim. That's my goal. I want to know him. I want to know him in the newness of life we talked about yesterday, in the power of his resurrection, and in the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, because without the cross, there's no resurrection, right? So I want to walk in to know him only in part is not to know him. I want to know him in the power of his resurrection, yes, in the newness of life, but in the sharing of his sufferings. This is all part of the same thing. Remember in chapter 1, Philippians 1:29, he said, we've been graced not just with faith to believe, but we've been graced to be able to suffer with him. This is part of what we've been called to, becoming like him in his death, if somehow I might arrive at the resurrection from among the dead. He says, not that I have already obtained or taken hold of what? This knowing of him. It's not that he's not referring to the resurrection from the dead. Of course, he hasn't taken hold of the resurrection from the dead. He hasn't died yet. So I want to know him. Not that I have taken hold of this or have been made perfect or have been perfected, have been made complete, have reached the goal. He says, I haven't, I'm in pursuit. But he says, but I pursue, I press on. If only I might take hold of that for which Messiah took hold of me. And it could be translated, which is my preferred translation, to say, if only I might take hold of him inasmuch as he took hold of me, inasmuch as Messiah Yeshua took hold of me. I want to know him, right? It's like what John says, this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us. Right? My love is in response to him. My taking hold of him, of knowing him, is in response to him having taken hold of me. Right? He took the initiative. And I am in pursuit of knowing him in totality. He says, brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself as having taken hold of this. But this one thing, he says, but one. That's kind of, there's a strong emphasis, just but one thing. Forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead. I press on toward the goal for the reward of the upward calling of God in Messiah Yeshua. So again, what we've seen is Paul describing his own. So you saw the mindset of Messiah, right? In chapter 2, the mind, have this attitude which was in Messiah Yeshua, have this mind which was in Messiah Yeshua, who being in very nature God, didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, right? So he started from a place of privilege, but he humbled himself, he emptied himself, taking on the very form of a servant, and becoming obedient unto death, even to death on a cross. Therefore, so he came from the place of privilege, he emptied himself, humbled himself, and became obedient to death, so God has exalted him, right? Given him the name that is above every other name. So what you see here was Paul saying, yeah, I had all this stuff, but it's garbage. I've thrown all of this away. I want to know him and the power of his resurrection, the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, and I want that to be glorified in him for the reward of the upward calling of God in Messiah Yeshua. Verse 15, he says, therefore, we began to touch on this yesterday, therefore let all who are teleoi is complete, mature, perfect, right? Those who have attained, who have gotten there, have this mind, have this attitude. And if you have a different attitude or mindset in anything, this also God will reveal to you. So basically, he's saying, look, this is what spiritual maturing looks like. People think of, we've talked about this in the past, we think of people who are spiritually mature. And sometimes that will be equated to, maybe someone who can really teach the Bible. Maybe they can teach theology. They can parse all these words, and you can do all this stuff. You can teach all of this stuff, but it's the walking in it. It's the walking in it that God has called us to do. So we looked at that passage yesterday in 2 Corinthians where Paul says, "Look, I don't want to have preached it and then not live it out, and then be disqualified and come through, and not have stood the test." Here he says, "Therefore, let all who are mature, all who are complete." He just acknowledged, "Look, I haven't fully gotten there yet, but I'm pressing on. I am maturing. I am becoming complete." And that's the goal. Just, I want to know him more and more every day, more of him and less of me. Right? As many of us as are complete. So he kind of includes himself. That's therefore let all, or let as many as who have reached the goal of this mindset. He says have this attitude. This is what spiritual maturity looks like. And he says, and if your mindset, if your understanding is different, he shows this confidence, the Lord will reveal it to you. And I love that it's God's job. I'm bringing it to your attention. I'm teaching. So he doesn't go, well, I'm not going to say anything about this here. Here he goes through. But if this hasn't taken hold yet, then the Lord will reveal it to you. The thing that I think about, when I went to Bible college, I was 18 years old. And through my years of Bible college and seminary, there were, and I already loved the Lord and was in pursuit of knowing Him, and there were things that theologically I understood, and I got it. I understood. I could read it. I could talk about it. But there have been things that years later that I could look back and go, I knew it, I understood it, but I didn't understand it. Like I knew it here, but I hadn't taken full root. I didn't get it. So I could talk about what sin is and grace, and I knew it on a certain level, but it didn't fully take hold of me in the same way, and so then once you sort of get, the Lord opens your eyes, it becomes revealed to you, and you're like, and you want others, you're like, no, do you see? Do you understand? And there are times where you can begin to get frustrated, like, come on, it's right there. How do you not see that? How do you not grasp this? When people that are just they're caught in religious cycles, and there's some blindness that your praying will break through. The thing that I have to remember is how gracious and patient the Lord was with me. And so in one sense, Paul is saying, if you don't have this attitude, I'm trusting God's going to reveal it to you. It may come down to how God had to reveal it to him. He may have to knock you off your high horse, right? He may have to, meet you you're on a path to do that. You think you're doing the right thing, and you're on, you're walking toward destruction. And he'll knock you off your high horse to awaken you to it. But he's trusting that God will reveal it to you. And so in that, there's not an arrogance in that. There's just a confidence. Look, you'll get it. So what I'm saying is we have to be patient. When you consider how patient God is with us, how long it took me to come to understanding on some things, and how patient the Lord was with me, and undoubtedly how patient he is with me right now. Things I think I know now that hopefully I'm growing in knowledge and understanding. Hopefully when I'm, 10 years from now, I'll be like, man, that I'll recognize how patient the Lord has been with me. And so he's like, God will reveal it to you, And so again, it's another way of expressing, I'm confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. Just verse 16, he goes, just don't go backward. Right? You've got these other people that are coming in trying to pull you backward. Beware of those who, which, as we've talked about, these ones that want to have you leaning on your religious, your checklist to elevate yourself. Beware of those who want to reduce this to anything that ends up being vain glory, that becomes self-exalting, self-centered. It can look religious, it can look spiritual, but it's selfish. Watch out. He says, just don't go backward. At the very least, be in conformity to the standard that we have reached. Verse 16, it says, nevertheless, let us live up to the same standard we have attained. Literally, it says, unto that which we have attained, let us behave in conformity to the same. So, perhaps in the face of internal, there's the opposition they're facing. We saw in chapter 1, there's internal dissension to some degree. Perhaps some of them have lost their clarity, lost their vision, and their focus on the crucified and risen Lord and what it is to walk in the power of the cross. But in prison here, Paul hasn't lost his vision. So he urges them to hey, to the point, hold on to what you already know. Unto that which we have attained, right? What you already have taken hold of. Keep living to that point. You're... Maybe you're not progressing in your understanding of there's still what it is to walk in Messiah, but to to that point, at least just don't go backward. He hasn't probably, given Paul's long time and loving relationship with the congregation, it's hard. He's not telling them probably a whole lot of new things in this letter. He's reminding them of things. It's not as though they haven't understood the mind of Messiah. Was likely a hymn that was sung in the congregations. This is the mind of Messiah narrative from chapter 2. That's foundational, and it's foundational for his own story. So it's not like this is the first time he's talked about his story, right? So he's telling them the same story over again. They've heard this before. So at least there's been that understanding. At the very least, to that which you've attained, don't move away from that for some reason. Live in conformity, be conformed to the good news that has been the gospel that has been spelled out repeatedly to you, the gospel in which we follow the one who has the life of the crucified one, that he is the paradigm. He's the example for we who would be his followers, right? Walk in the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings. That's what I'm in pursuit of. He says that don't go backward, at least attain to that. Verse 17, he says, brothers and sisters, join in following my example. He uses one word. It's a combination word, sum mimitai. So mimitai is to mimic, imitate, and sum is a joint. So imitate with me. Come on, let's do this together. Join in following my example, or imitate with me. Imitate the Lord with me. Become joint imitators with me. And notice those. The word notice is scopos, like scope. Like pay close attention to those who walk according to the pattern you have in us. The pattern is the type. The word is the type, the example, again, this model that you've been given. He says, become joint imitators with me. And I want you to scope out to notice those who walk in this pattern, this type, the model that you have in us. In who? He pointed to Timothy in chapter 2, right? Timothy genuinely cares about. That's why I'm going to send Timothy, because there's nobody there's the others are all focused on on themselves above what Messiah wants, but not Timothy. Look at the pattern in him. I'm going to point you to Epaphroditus, right, who was willing to die for the sake of the gospel. In chapter 2, verse 29, he says, hold men like him in high honor, in esteem, in high regard. Right? Those who are walking the way of Messiah. In 1 Corinthians 11:1, he had said a similar thing. He says, be imitators of me just as I also am of Messiah. Right? Follow me as I follow Messiah. The mind of Messiah, the way of Messiah, the way which he is walking in, he's calling them to walk in, right? And what way is that? It's the way of the cross. And it stands in the way that he's calling, the way that he's calling them to walk stands in stark contrast to the way of the world. The way of the world are enemies of the cross. And what we'll see, which we'll see on the following Monday when we continue in verse 18, is the enemies of the cross. He's not necessarily describing, while it would refer to those who are sort of pagans out there. That's not where the real danger is here. The danger zone isn't enemies of the cross that are outside. It's enemies of the cross that are inside the community, that will give voice to the things of the Lord, but not walk in the way of the Lord. And I feel like in the American believing community, because of the freedom that we have here, there is no real persecution. I mean, people describe things as persecution anytime they get a little, twisted out of joint. Anytime they don't get their way, they're like, we're being persecuted. But people are actually suffering for the sake of the gospel, and we're not really suffering. But because of sort of the license and the way and the how much we all have here, the danger is to give voice to the cross, but not to walk the way of the cross. And so, of course, the world is not walking in a way of laying down self. But the way of the cross, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. That's the way we're to walk. That's the Halakhah. That's the way of walking. So in Judaism, as many of you know, there's a set of rules and practices that are very particular, that are to govern the very practical aspects of the way in which we live our lives, the way we live and move and have our being. And it's known as the Halakhah, the way of walking. So, in Passover we have the Haggadah, which is the narrative, is the story. And the Halakhah is, okay, what to do now with that. Halakhah, again, literally means a way of walking. In Psalm 1:1, blessed is he who has not who has not walked in the counsel of the wicked. So in Judaism, Halakhah is the written code of ethical teachings and precepts that cover, ad nauseum, every possible contingency in life. What to do when you wake up in the morning, what you can eat, what you can't eat, what you can wear, what you can't wear, how to groom yourself, how to conduct business, who you can marry, how to observe the holidays, the Sabbaths, perhaps most important, how to obey toward God and other people and animals and so forth. And Jewish Halakhah is made up of the commands, the mitzvot from the Torah. As well as, in addition, there are other laws that have been instituted by the rabbis, certain customs in Jewish tradition. And in Judaism, these are all equally binding. So that's what you have there, these things that get added to. Well, here, what Paul says, Rabbi Paul, Rav Shaul, right? He points to the Halakhah of Yeshua. It's the way of walking. He says, the way of walking, walk in this way. Follow the example of Messiah Yeshua. That's what I'm doing. He's walking, and I'm staying lockstep behind him. I want to know him. I want to know him in the newness of life, in the power of his resurrection, in the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings. I want to walk the path of Yeshua. Paul says, the path I'm walking is the Halakhah I'm walking is the Halakhah of Yeshua, is the walk of Yeshua. Follow me. Stay on this path, right? You've gotten this, and what does that look like? Well, what he's demonstrated, what is the way of Messiah? He's been, throughout the letter, Paul's been painting this picture, right? In chapter 1, we were given this window into what Paul's life looks like, into this example, this model, this type, the Greek word tupos, this type that he's calling us to follow. He's demonstrated to him living a life with seeing from the Lord's perspective. He's in prison because of his devotion to obeying the call of God on his life, the mandate on his life. He's imprisoned, suffering because of his faithfulness. We've talked about this. So many people think as soon as we hit obstacles, they think, am I out of the will of God? And oftentimes those obstacles are happening when we're right in the very center of God's will. And he's wanting to form in those moments for those obstacles to give us opportunity to demonstrate the character of Yeshua. And so while in prison, right, Paul is dealing with the fact that there are others and the believers, in fact, that are rather than that are behaving to him as enemies. And rather than him denigrating them or putting them down, he looks and says, you know what? But Messiah is being preached, and that's what matters. This isn't about me. This life is about Messiah. I'm willing to die to my own ego. I'm willing to die to my own reputation. I'm willing to die to what they're saying. Okay, fine, but Messiah is being preached. So that's follow my example. He's in prison, and he's taking the opportunity throughout this time. What has actually happened is that he's in the Praetorian Guard, and so they're coming to know the Lord. Follow my example. Even when it comes to the question of whether he's going to live or he's going to die, he's got a mindset, right? He's got the mind of Messiah, a mindset set on things above. Not an earthly mindset, but a heavenly mindset that's focused on Messiah. He says, if I live, great. If I keep living, I'm living for Messiah, and I can continue to do what he's calling me to do. If I die, that's even better for me, he says. The Halakhah of Yeshua is about laying it all down. And so Paul gives us this glimpse of his example, and then he points us in chapter 2 to the Halakhah of Yeshua. Right? This is the way of the man. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or in pursuit of vain conceit. This isn't about you, he says, and it isn't about me. It's about him. It's about the master. Have this attitude in yourselves. This is the way that we are to walk. This is the way we are to walk. Right? Look at Yeshua, follow after him. He was being in very nature God. He demonstrated us the way of God's heart. He lived the life of the cross. He lived the life of giving of self-sacrifice. He who had said, if you want to be the greatest of all, you must be the servant of all. He then exemplified what that very greatness looks like. He lived a life full of taking up his cross. He lived a life that was the polar opposite of selfish ambition. He never once did anything selfishly. A life of selfless abandon. That's the way of walking the Halakhah of Yeshua. Yeshua's driving ambition was not to save himself, but rather to give himself to save others. Right? His life was lived in obedience to submission to the heart of the purposes of the Father, to the point of even death on a cross and of an undignified, humiliating, like, I'm better than this. I deserve. No, he laid it all down to the point of death on a cross. And so Paul says, look, I want to walk in his way. I can see, because I'm following him now, I can see my own suffering, and I can even see my enemies from a different mindset. That's not about, well, I'm offended and how it affects me. But the more I'm dead to self, when I'm dead to self, when I get offended, it just shows me that I'm not dead to self yet. When I get bent out of joint, my nose bent out of joint, I think is the phrase. Oh, it's burning. That attitude there is an indicator. It's an engine light that just says, that's not the mind of Messiah. I'm not yet there. I want to know him. And that's what Paul is saying. And he's saying, look, that's what I'm after. Not that I obtained this, but I am in pursuit. I want to follow his example. Just come on, get on the train. Let's follow me as I follow him. Right? Follow me as, that's the way of walking. And then he'll go on in verse 8. I'll just read verse 18 very quickly here. He says, for many walk, because when you see verse 18 where it says many walk who are enemies of the cross of Messiah, the whole phrase who are enemies of the cross of Messiah is the closing phrase is actually at the very end of the verse. So the way it reads is, many walk, I've often told you about them, and now I'm even weeping as I tell you, who are enemies of the cross of Messiah. It's this heartbreaking thing for him. There are so many, and he's like, I've told you about them, and he's been pointing to them, probably in particular the ones he called dogs, the mutilators of the flesh. But he's told them, those who then would be within, calling themselves part of the community, but they're not walking the way of the cross. And it's heartbreaking to him. I'm weeping as I tell you about them. Don't follow them. Don't walk in that way. Don't pattern after them. Pattern after the Halakhah of Yeshua. Look, we live in a world in which, like, people are going to tell you that That's okay. You're fine. It's not about walking in self-condemnation, like I said, but they'll excuse. They'll be like, they'll excuse it. Well, I mean, I know he wants us to die to self, but and then excuse will give voice to the way of the cross, but have a life that is not that at all, right? And it's where there's this dissonance, this contradiction. And what is actually driving us is we wear a cross, or people will have a cross and talk about the cross, but not live the cross, not walk the way of self-sacrifice. And so that's the verse here. Is he's saying, follow me, be imitators, walk in this way as I follow him. Let's walk the way of Messiah. Amen. All right. Well, Shabbat Shalom. Let me say hello to everybody. Good morning to Joshua, and let's see here. Sorry, to Joshua, and good afternoon to Tina Fowler, and to Pat and Lori. Good morning, and to Kathleen, and to Lauren and Mike and David and Levi and Valor and Haven and Everett. And let me see here. I gotta refresh. Gotta refresh these pages. My apologies. I normally refresh them before we begin, but I didn't today. Good morning to Jason and Ashley and to Ami. Good morning, you guys. It was good seeing you last night. And good morning to Misty and to Barbara and to Barbara Eaker and to Barbara Callahan and to Pastor and Sister Martinez and to Kelly Kenfield and to Kelly and Melody Woods and to Jerry and Janet and Dayspring and Rachel and let's see here, and good morning to Ron and Amy and to Sonia and Margarita, and good morning to Sonia Tkach and to Hattie and Deborah and Joyce and Joe and Jeannie and Sharon, and good afternoon to my sister Maria. I love you, sis. I hope you're doing well. Good morning to Misty. All right, well, Shabbat Shalom. Let's walk the way of Yeshua. Say, Spirit of the living God, like today reveal to us in those moments where we're not walking the way of the cross, where we're reacting in ways that are because our flesh is ruling. Lord, in those moments, let the voice of your Spirit bring to our attention when we're letting our flesh rule. And may we walk in a contented submission, in a joyful submission to your way, because your way brings life and peace and wholeness. Strengthen us this day and shine through us so that we'll shine like stars in the universe against the backdrop of the darkness of this world. We love you and praise you in Yeshua's name. Amen. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.
He who began a good work in He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. He'll be faithful to complete it. He who started the work will be faithful to complete it in you.
Oh, thank you, Lord, that you're faithful to us.
He who began a good work in
He who began a good work in you.
He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. He'll be faithful to depend on you, safe and secure. He will never abandon you. You are his treasure, and he finds his pleasure in you.
He who began
Began a good work in you.
Began a good work in you.
He who began a good work in you
will be faithful.
to complete it.
Will be faithful.
He'll be faithful to complete it. He who started the work will be faithful to complete it in you.
He'll be faithful.
Will be faithful to complete it. He'll be faithful to complete it. He who started the work will be faithful to complete it in you. He'll complete it in you.
Lord, we praise you tonight for your faithfulness. Your words declared it. You will be faithful.